so much about what we learn love is about where we are, who we came up around, how we are supposed to act and behave with each other. And there are these kind of prescriptive behaviors and rituals that we engage in that we are taught are synonymous with what it means to be loved. And I think as we grow, we learn how insufficient those things are.
We've all in various ways been sold a bill of goods, a set of elaborate and attractive, but ultimately untrue things about what life is for, our purpose, our meaning. And to me, a lot of it just comes back to, are we able to remember who we are and why we're here? And to gently draw others into that, right? Like not through shame, not through coercion, not through, oh, you need to get it together, you need to do this. So we all getting it together. But I will say, it's much more joyful to be doing the work of getting it together when I'm not alone.
This is the Lirae Journey podcast on the McKissick Health Podcast Network. I'm Dr. Sherella Cupid, your host.
The Lirae Journey podcast is a space for Black women to choose themselves. For season 3, the theme is love and. We'll continue the sister circle conversations with Black women from different stages of life within various roles regarding personal, community, and professional. The intention of the season is to continue and start conversations on the meanings, experiences, and practices around love in numerous areas. This is our grounding season. Because Lirae means love is real and eternal. So sis, let's practice love.
Hey sisters, supporters, and sponsors to the Lirae Journey podcast. Welcome back. For season 3, the theme is love and we'll continue the sister circle conversations with Black women. But actually, this time, we're continuing the conversations with Black men from different stages of life with various personal, community, and professional roles. The intention of this season is to continue and start conversations on the meanings, experiences, and practices around love in numerous areas, such as community, career, motherhood, and sisterhood. This is our grounding season because Lirae means love is real and eternal. So sis, let's practice love. This episode is different from previous episodes, as I stated in my usual introduction, because it's a podcast collaboration episode with Black Men Unlearning. The co-hosts, Kyle Brooks and Edwin Lee, invite you on a journey to unlearn the ideologies, thought practices, and habits that get in the way of peace, freedom, and joy. So I'll turn it over to Black Men Unlearning co-hosts Kyle Brooks and Edwin Lee to give us a brief introduction about themselves.
What's good, everybody? Black Men Unlearning is a space that Kyle and I cultivated just to give Black men and folks who are in relationship and community with Black men an opportunity to dive deeper, to understand the parts of our lives and our journeys that we've held on to evaluate those things, and to really understand whether or not they are things that we'd like to hold on to, whether they are thought processes or patterns that continue to serve us. We're heavy into the practice of letting go, of changing our mind, and of learning new things. And so Black Men Unlearning is a space and place to do that work.
We pursue this work out of a desire to clarify for ourselves first how we have grown and developed, how we were shaped and formed by particular ideas and imaginations of the world that weren't always the healthiest or the best. And so part of our practice is twofold. One, what does it look like to come into recognition and awareness of these formative aspects of our own lives? And then what does it mean to actively choose to build, to construct, to fulfill our imagination for a healthier existence, for flourishing modes of masculinity and manhood? And what does it look like to not just be our best selves in a vague way, but to intentionally and creatively pursue the steps that actually allow us to build the kinds of lives we want to have.
So in regards to y'all's relationship, like what is the origin of y'all's relationship?
So Kyle moved to Columbus after I had been in Columbus for quite some time. He was a guest preacher at my the church that we both ended up going to. My my girlfriend at the time actually knew him already from his graduate school, her undergrad. And so we connected and we started being in the same circles. And then we, would just get into conversations all the time whenever we were hanging out. And the conversations had a particular depth to the point that one of our mutual friends would make the joke that every time Kyle and I were together, it was just words. Like it's so we drove up. We took a friend trip to Detroit one summer, and Kyle and I rode in the car together. And she joked that when we opened the door, all those words fell out because we were just talking the whole time. But yeah, so I had been thinking about a podcast for a while, and we went to an event or something, and I just said to Kyle, I was like, "Hey, I had this idea for a podcast, and I want to do it with you. What you think?" And he was like, "Yes, absolutely." So yeah, that's how the friendship started. But that's also the kind of the pod origin as well.
When I think back to our conversation, like I think for Edwin and I, and Edwin can weigh in as he sees it. I think our desire was to model, okay, we are Black men taking seriously this realm of Black feminist thought and asking questions about how it invites us to reimagine our self-understanding and our engagement with the world.
For sure. And to create space for folks who listen to engage with the text as well. I don't want to make the assumption that everyone has had the privileges that Kyle and I have had to come up in this specific educational structure that gives us access to these things, and particularly to Hooks's work. And so this felt like a great place as we, have built kind of the reputation and library of conversations that we've had to say, hey, let's take a look at this text, and it's inviting perhaps a new audience to sit with stuff that doesn't always feel like it's exactly right. The idea of that violence and love don't exist in the same space. I wonder what it means for us to then situate our family structures outside of love. And like, what does that do to what we think of ourselves or our experiences or our family members, right? And is that the correct way to go about that? And I think that those are questions that we can probably sit with in a conversation. But yeah, like the aim was not necessarily to come away with one thing, but to try to treat the whole book and go through each chapter and our reflections of it, so that it'll be tantalizing, because this was my second read of the book, and it hit completely different. There might have been 3 years in between, but it hit completely different the second time.
Even in reading Hook's book, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, if it doesn't exist in that space, I mean, if we think about family or any type of social community, then it is dysfunction, right? And I think a lot of us, we have to exist in a space of dysfunction, because you can't hold others accountable. They can only hold themselves accountable. So if we agree to that premise, then it's like, okay, well, I have to exist in this dysfunction, whether or not you're in that family space, because, okay, well, I got to make sure these kids got stuff to eat, or et cetera, right? I got to make sure my kids are safe. So I will exist in this dysfunction because I am not responsible for changing that person's behavior.
So what came to mind to me as you were talking, and I reflect on this often, that famous conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin.
Mhm.
And what I'm particularly interested in are, one, because I think about that statement from Hooks, and part of me thinks I both get that, and I'm like, well, haven't those things always coexisted in some respect? We've had to like carve out or find a space, a way, a means of creating, sustaining love against like odds and circumstances that work to dismantle that possibility. But also I'm thinking too about like the texture of that conversation between Giovanni and Baldwin, because there's a tenderness there. There's a desire for them to really see and hear each other. And there are also like these moments where, and I particularly think of as they're trying to adjudicate like how the experiences of black men and black women often function to complicate their relationship to each other. And Nikki Giovanni talks, and Baldwin talks about like, how you've got to wear this mask, you got to like carry this lie all day, and when you come home, right, you don't want to carry the lie anymore. And Nikki responds to him and says, well, lie to me sometimes. You do all that work for all these other people, all these other institutions, all these other folk. Where's the tenderness for me? Where's the embrace for me? Where's the softness there? And so I think there's a lot, part of what I wanted to be able to model even in this conversation is, what does it look like for us to be honest about where we are vulnerable and what that means for, on some level, our, if not wholly expectations, at least our desires from one another. Like, what is it that you want Black men to know and see and understand? What is it that we as Black men want Black women to know, see, and understand, so that we can all collectively like be better together?
Thank y'all for those beautiful introductions. So, in thinking about, I'm going to bring up some keywords that really stood out to me. So, in letting go, in imagination, in building, in this season of our lives, what is your definition of love?
What comes to mind for me immediately is intentionality, and particularly intentional cultivation and maintenance of safety and of care and of deep honesty. I am aware that this isn't just a practice that should happen romantically. It is the care and safety and honesty that I even cultivate with myself. And that it is a process that is continuous, it's always in motion. And yeah, I'm always refining how to best love myself and the people in my life.
When I consider the idea, the concept of love, one of the framings that comes to mind for me immediately is that of James Baldwin, where he talks about this idea that love does not begin and end the way we seem to think it does. Love is a battle, love is a war, love is a growing up. What I take away from his framing are these ideas. One, that love is not about a predictable path towards the future, but it is an active response to the circumstances at hand. For me, love is not unconditional, but rather it is a choosing under whatever conditions present themselves. So it's acknowledging that it will be tested, it will be challenging at various moments. But it's also in that way, for love to be a battle, love to be a war, what we understand is that we don't necessarily seek out conflict or violent ends, but we understand that in the journey to be well, to be whole, to bring about the kinds of outcomes we want to see in the world and in our own lives, sometimes that involves some struggle. Sometimes it means resistance to elements that would thwart our idea of care for one another or care for ourselves. And I think with love being a growing up, it means to love is to choose a path towards maturity. It is to say that where I am is not bad, but this is not a finish line. To me, I don't think of love as a thing to be accomplished as much as it's a thing to be practiced, a way of being and a way of doing, versus simply a kind of object to pursue.
Yeah, I think yeah, both brought up really touching points. For me, what led me even to focus on love was just growing in different types of relationships. Like you said, Edwin, is not just centering the romantic relationships, but you really harked on the importance of knowing oneself and that self-love and that self-refinement, right? So even in thinking about bell hooks and all about love, her saying it's that interconnectedness, that interbeingness. Like, what does it mean for us to do life together and to lead with that versus the violence that we are a part of because of the society that we live in, that I would always argue is anti-love, right? So if you're a person that seeks to practice love, you're always in tension with the world in which that we have to exist in this current state, right? So for me, in this season of love, is learning how to balance being in communities of love while knowing that I too have to participate in spaces of violence. So like, what does that look like? What does that feel like, right? The relevance of sister circles, right? The ways in which Black women are intentional to create those spaces where love can be actualized without the dysfunction. Not saying that they aren't challenges, right? But in thinking about just the concept of family, what does that mean for y'all as Black men? Because I often ask Black men, who do you do life with? And some are like, what you mean, sis? I don't, what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I talk to my dad when I need to, or, I talk, so it's that question is a question that I do have for Black men, like outside of your romantic relationship, even if you're in one, who are you doing life with, even before you enter into that space, right? That's a question that I often carry and thinking about this, the ways in which, like, how do we heal and curate new ways of being as Black communities? And as a woman, the concept of safety is really pertinent. For me to feel safe in any relationship is for you to hold space for my emotional vulnerability as a woman. And I think in thinking about like masculinity and femininity and the things in which we think about, and particularly in the Black community, like what does it mean for us, both as Black men and Black women, to be soft and that to be okay, right? I think for me right now, I'm living through that understanding and thinking about how am I defining love in this season? Like, what does it mean for us to hold space for us to be soft and that be viewed as normal and necessary and needed versus something that is not human?
I'm so glad you brought up this idea of safety, because I've been thinking about that a great deal. One, in light of the ways that I have tried to be attentive to the women in my life, in my circles, in my social and professional spheres, and how they have been feeling and responding to this most recent election. But also how those responses and those feelings are a reflection of the ways that they have been living and existing in this world. And I'm reminded a lot of safety given the way that we have in our society so many kinds of apparatuses or institutions that frame themselves as being about the preservation of safety. Right? The military is supposed to preserve the safety of our national interests of our citizens. Police are framed as preserving the peace or maintaining ultimately the safety and security of property. We got Ring cameras on everyone's doors, right? Trying to maintain a sense of safety. People on the Nextdoor app going bananas because everybody, they see a ghost around the corner or they're afraid of their own shadow. And so much of what often gets framed as an attempt towards safety is an attempt to fortify, to insulate, to create a barrier or boundary between. And so many ideas of safety are not about what does it look like to open up in a way that allows us all to be inside, allows us all to be connected, allows us all to be covered. And every now and again, when I can really take a step back and reflect on, like, how safety is very much about an internal belief. And what does the environment, what do the people around you do to help inform and reaffirm that belief that you are actually secure, that you can put your armor down, right, and your weapons down? Because to me, it's safety that becomes like the precursor to whatever beautiful relationship, whatever love relationship we honestly want to build with each other.
To that point, I think Hook's work does such a great job of taking what we know and what we think we know and really cutting through and highlighting the important part. And so within these institutions, we get used to and we get brought up within a context of normalizing how we move through the world. And Hooks, particularly early in All About Love, points to the fact that we do not learn how to love instinctively. And so much about what we learn love is about where we are, who we came up around, how we are supposed to act and behave with each other. And there are these kind of prescriptive behaviors and rituals that we engage in that we are taught are synonymous with what it means to be loved. And I think as we grow, we learn how insufficient those things are. All the Ring cameras in the world don't make you feel safe. It doesn't stop you from being on the Nextdoor app, jumping at every little thing that comes down the street, right? It puts us in position to really just think more about how unsafe we feel. But it doesn't actually move us toward action. And it points to the fact that we want to be able to some part of us wants to be able to engage in love from a position of just it happening without us having an effort toward it. And that I've learned is just not possible. There's a requirement for us to do the work. And I think when we say that becomes just something that we repeat all the time. And it's like, what does the work actually look like? It looks like actually thinking about what it is that we need, thinking about the people in our lives and understanding our own depth enough to understand that another human is as complex and full as you are. One of my favorite words is sonder, because it really highlights this thought that I was having as a child. It's like, wow, everybody's lives around me are as complex as mine. And it really helps us to see that we are significant in our insignificance and insignificant in our significance. Like there's this balance between that, right? Mm-hmm. It's important for us to recognize that all the things that we feel, that we need, that we want to be understood about us, the people that we share this world with have that same complexity, have that same need, that same desire. And the work of loving each other pulls us towards caring about what it means to do that.
I think our desire was to model, okay, we are Black men taking seriously this realm of Black feminist thought and asking questions about how it invites us to reimagine our self-understanding and our engagement with the world. I want us to be able to model, even in this conversation, is what does it look like for us to be honest about where we are vulnerable and what that means for, on some level, our, if not wholly expectations, at least our desires from one another. Like, what is it that you want Black men to know and see and understand? What is it that we as Black men want Black women to know, see, and understand, so that we can all collectively like be better together?
For sure. And to create space for folks who listen to engage with the text as well. I don't want to make the assumption that everyone has had the privileges that Kyle and I have had to come up in this specific educational structure that gives us access to these things, and particularly to Hooks's work. And so this felt like a great place as we, have built kind of the reputation and library of conversations that we've had to say, hey, let's take a look at this text, and it's inviting perhaps a new audience to sit with stuff that doesn't always feel like it's exactly right. I think that also is in alignment with the foundations of our creating Black Men Unlearning as well. When we first sat down in a coffee shop and we're mapping it out, we thought about creating a space where Black men could hear folks doing the work, and in a lot of the ways that we've done this over the course of the last 3.5 years, it's been really thinking about it in that context. Like, how do we bring those conversations to folks in ways that we receive them, but with our filter on them, like knowing how it can be difficult to receive, but then like giving the medicine regardless, right?
Yeah.
So that sister circle model is very poignant here, because I think this is like what we're aiming for is an analog of that, I would say.
Yeah, because y'all may not have the barbershop as much more, right? I think post-quarantine, the ways in which we have to resituate community.
For sure.
Yeah, it's like that to me is a big vacuum that I think that vacuum effect, I feel like, has been multiplied like across all of like social and communal life over these last several years. And it's no coincidence to me, even when I think about like the ways that a certain kind of media production like took off in that space. So like a lot of these we wasn't doing all that, all this red balloon popping, all the even a vast number of these like podcasts or like vlog type joints, right, that like have a way of grabbing people who ultimately I think are often very lonely, very isolated. And this becomes like a space for them to attach to. So, I mean, some of it, I do think about what we're doing as kind of a counter programming, that like, if the media space is already going to be full with a lot of trash, what does it look like to very intentionally say like, hey, let's talk about and model what like the sort of localized building of community can look like.
Okay.
What's good, everybody? My name is Edwin Lee, and I'm the co-host of the Black Men Unlearning podcast. My co-host Kyle Brooks and I invite you to join us on a journey to unlearn the ideologies, thought patterns, and habits that get in the way of peace, freedom, and joy for Black men. Now, you don't have to be a Black man to listen, but our show includes all kinds of topics that are relevant for everyone. Just rethink how we're moving through the world. This is Black Men Unlearning. You can catch us every other Thursday on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Peace.
in thinking about the practice of love, either what would you like Black women to know about Black men, or particularly about yourself in this journey in considering love?
So I will say that what I would like for Black women to know about how we are navigating the journey is that the question of why is just as important as the question of how and what. And I'll explain what I mean by that. In my own journey towards better practices of loving, and along with that, better practices of emotional presence and expression, one of the things that I had to come to terms with was how, in the course of growing up and development and becoming a man, I was given so many competing messages around how to show up emotionally. Whether it was, hey, big boys don't cry, like, suck it up, man up, right? Like, walk it off, like accepting an idea of pain and restraint from expressing pain as part of just the process, the requirement of being a man. Over time, some of the ways that shows up is in a restraint around sharing what I really think and feel, for fear of how is this going to be framed or used against me? How is it going to be taken as a sign of weakness, as a deficiency, as a thing to be reminded of out of context at another time? And one of the great struggles is that when, as a man, I have sometimes been more stoic or more reserved than some of the women in my life, or like some of my romantic partners, et cetera, might have liked. Part of the challenge is it's easy to become good at pointing out the thing you don't like or what you don't like about it. And I can understand, no one wants to be trying to actively build relationship with someone who has a degree of emotional unavailability. The challenge is if we only critique the sort of form or the structure that presents itself to us, but don't ask good questions about why that is. So throughout my life, I've had various ways of being told, like, oh, you're too reserved, or you're too stoic, or, oh, you're cold or withdrawn or aloof. And the thing is, I actually am a deeply feeling and sensitive person. I would dare say more than most men I've encountered. The challenge is that it becomes very difficult to perform the kind of calibration that's going to feel most comfortable for other people. And so, where I have often felt challenged in my sort of practice of working through relationality and love with the women in my life has been that they were willing often to name, oh, I don't feel as comfortable, or I don't feel as, embraced, or I don't feel the kind of warmth I want to feel, the kind of passion, the kind of availability I want to feel emotionally. But there wasn't always like a consideration of, well, wait, why is it that you show up in the way you do, or why, like, do you feel the way you feel? Because I'm like, man, I'm a human being. I have emotions, I have cares, I have passions, concerns, and all of that is there. But it becomes doubly difficult to share and place that in a space where you feel like, am I safe and secure to say this how I feel it? Can I trust that I'm really going to be heard rather than just reacted or responded to? And like, these are things that I think are all, you know, it's part of practice, right? We teach people how to love us better. We teach people how to care for us, how to be attentive to things. But yeah, you know, it's one of the things that, like, if I were to distill it to, like, here's one thing I really want you to know, want you to understand. I would want women in my life, or women who encounter me, to understand that it's not that feeling is absent, but it's often too that the reticence or the restraint has been a response to the ways that the world has often been very unkind to the vulnerability, to the openness, you know? So most folk, they don't want to hear, you know, manly man talking about, like, hey, you know what? It hurt when someone I loved ghosted me. Or, hey, you know what? It hurt when I kind of wore my heart on my sleeve. I put these feelings out here and it got treated or disregarded as, like, irrelevant, unimportant, silly, foolish. Like, oh, you should have known better than to do that. Like, there's a whole world of experiences that shape how we show up in an immediate interaction. And so rather than, like, reading our interactions as, oh, well, this is evidence of, well, you know, if he wanted to, he would. It's like, well, it may be a little more layered than that. And I want us to really be able to offer each other the grace to see the layers. So, yeah, that's what I would share about my journey.
On my end, you know, in the space that we've cultivated with Black Men Unlearning, we have challenged these ideas of the, you know, false dichotomy of logic and feelings. And I think there is a necessity for us to acknowledge that we've all come up in space where we've learned love imperfectly. And so men are, and men, all of us, it's not just a men thing, but all of us are feeling and thinking. We are body and spirit. We exist between these dichotomies, and we are not one or the other. There is no binary in that. And so, as much as men can be socialized to prefer logic over feelings, all of these things arise from our brain. So, preferring one over another is ridiculous, or to say that one makes you less of a man is ridiculous. And so we do feel, and there is a necessity for men to embrace that, but also for us to interrogate our collective socialization that would push us or move us to a place of finding fault with encountering those real feelings. And in order for us to cultivate real safe space for each other, we have to be willing to see each other fully in that manner. And it is not one of these things where I am giving advice that is prescriptive for one and not valuable for the other. We are in this together collectively across the gender spectrum, across all ways of showing up in identity. It's necessary for us to see each other as levelly human. And in doing so, we get to embrace a more full and whole practice of being engaged in love. And so it is being willing to interrogate the parts of us that shy away from seeing these expressions as anything but human. And to see that the value of being in relationship with each other is not masculine or feminine. It's not one or the other, but it's in our humanity that we are finding this beauty and this joy and freedom and love.
I think that's a beautiful space for us to wrap up in thinking about our humanity and the complexity and the layeredness of it all. I would say for me as a Black woman in this journey, in community with sisters, in community with brothers, and this connects to your point, Kyle, in that there's always a story behind what we see as external, right? And I think for me, in thinking about vulnerability, is learning how to sit in the discomfort and be safe in this and being discomfort or uncomfortable. So for me now, in thinking about us creating spaces that are counter to what is quote unquote deemed as necessary or normal, I'm asking myself, like, what does it mean for me to be safe in spaces when we are doing this work, right? When we are journeying together, when I don't understand like what you are saying, but I'm trying to understand, but I really don't understand, right? So like, what does it mean for us to not give up and not acquiesce to solitude because that's quote unquote easier, right? So in thinking about how do we continue on in this journey, for me, it's about holding vulnerability as sacred and necessary in order for us to practice this love, right? So that's what I would say right now for me as a Black woman, as a human, like if we want to practice freedom, which I really appreciate Toni Morrison's definition of freedom is having the choice to choose your responsibilities. If we can get to that place, if we are pushing towards that existence, then what does this mean for us to go together and to choose to view love as worthy and necessary versus something that is like romanticized and quote unquote happy endings, right? If we view love as necessary, then if you have decided to journey with me, then journey with me. And what does that look like? So I think in thinking about what you said, Edwin, that interrogation is that ongoing process of investing that energy because it's worth it. Yeah. In your response, you said, we don't want to think about love as work, which I think is really important for us to think through because we live in a society that 36 to 40 hours, that's the quote unquote full time, right? Well, but when we think about the prep time, the commute time, et cetera, the decompression time, it becomes more than 40 hours, right? So I think the reason why they maybe push back to think about love as work is because literal work takes up so much time of our existence. Like, what does it mean in order for us to live? We have to work for the majority. And that's something that I wrestle with, right? Like, I don't think you should have to work in order to earn your humanity, but I feel as though that's the hidden message that we are being fed. Like, oh, grow up, you go to college, or you get, a trade degree, et cetera, and then you're okay. Right. I think like as millennials, we were socialized to believe that this thing will lead us to wellness. But now we are here and recognizing that, oh, wait a minute, this is not it. Right. So I think that's why there's a lot of resistance in regards to viewing love as work, which in thinking about Kyle's question, like, how do we lay down our armor? Right. Like, what does it mean for us to lay down the things that are making it more difficult for us to view each other as both complex and complicated and layered. So that's something that I've been thinking about recently. Like I'm looking at the economy. I'm sure it's probably going up on your feed. Like you said, we're in a new election, and that's always something that's on the ballot. Like, how are you going to secure our jobs, right? How are you going to better improve the economy, et cetera? How am I going to make sure that I can live well, right? So I think that becomes a challenge if love is equated to work, and thinking about like, how do we practice love? At least for me, in the conversations that I'm having. Because who wants to work after you clock off again, right? So to come home and do work again when you want to rest, yeah.
So the thing that immediately comes to mind, and I saw this in a video I was watching earlier today, where a gentleman and a woman with whom, they were negotiating their sort of romantic relationship, and he talked about his feeling of resentment and how he had gone out, left early that morning, went grocery shopping, was getting things together for a sort of family gathering. He brought the things back. He prepared everything. Everybody ate. He leaves and comes back to dishes that needed doing. And what I was thinking about here was the idea that some of what part of what makes work challenging is when we feel as though it is singularly our burden versus a burden that is shared and distributed. And I will be very clear, capitalism is not interested in our healthy flourishing and rest. I think a measure of work for those who are able and willing to engage, right, to do something that's meaningful, has its value, but we don't live to work. We don't exist for the sake of mere productivity. I think we're here to dream, to imagine, to meander, right? To wander about. And there's very precious little space for that. Thinking about work, our relationship to work changes so much when we become knowledgeable of how much things actually cost and what it requires for many things to happen. As kids, we don't know anything about that. And so our lives are filled with a different kind of energy, a different kind of awareness. Uh, and as we become adults, I think we forget the critical balance to the work, right? So even kids have work to do. As a kid, I was told that, being in school, that's your job, so to speak. But my job didn't pay, and I didn't pay bills, and I didn't really know what that was all about. So when I was done doing my work, I was ready to play. Let's go outside. Let's ride these bikes. I'm thankful to have grown up in the era where like that was a thing you did. You went outside, you rode your bike. You might be gone all day during the summer, right? But I say all that to say that like there's an element of play that balances the work that gets suppressed, often quite actively as we become adults, as we become aware of just how fraught our existence in this world is. And so it makes sense that, and I know this just from doing it for myself. You go to work, you come back, it's like, man, am I really trying to cook tonight? Like, oh, did I thaw out that chicken? Like, did I do all the little things? Cause I already know I'm gonna have to cook unless I'm ordering out, which in this economy, you gotta chill. But I know I'm also gonna have to do the dishes. I'm gonna have to load that dishwasher. I'm gonna have to hand wash the stuff that can't go in there. I gotta unload it later. And the cycle continues. And so I think part of what comes to mind for me in this challenge of love as labor or work is that our world creates environments in which the incentive to really practice relational labor is taken away. it becomes easier to just detach and say, okay, I'm going to go to my job, then I'm going to go back to my home. I'm going to watch my shows and eat my food, and then I'm going to go sleep in my bed and then get up and do it all over again. And so I think in these times, it's illustrating just how much, one, we know how unsatisfying that solitary kind of life can be when it's what we're forced to do or compelled to do. But I also think that part of the way the labor of love needs to be understood is that we also have a responsibility, a duty to play. Like we play. It's, they call it recreation for a reason. Like you're recreating, you're bringing something to life, and so I feel a strong incentive to look at the labor of love as also being like, yo, how do you really intentionally create space to break away from the rhythm of a world that seems to only care about your productivity and your profit?
And I appreciate you highlighting the tension with that word work, because um, I think in the capitalistic society in which we exist, that is an entirely valid response. And in that way, I think work can be an imperfect word to use to describe the practice, and maybe practice is probably the better way to go. Um, but it does point to the energy that we have to have for each other. This brought me back to the conversation between Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, particularly the moment where Nikki Giovanni says, "Fake it for me, pretend for me," right? And how our default with each other, that idea of coming to rest and doing nothing, of coming home and unburdening ourselves from all things because of exhaustion, is not actually a natural phenomenon. It's really a response that is reflective of the lack that capitalism foists upon us, right? Like we're forced to feel like we have nothing left at the end of the day, which then pulls us away from each other, because I'm so exhausted. I'm so without peace within myself that I don't have the ability to see the depth of you. I mean, what just came to mind for me is like being in traffic. Everybody just trying to get home, pissed at each other, cutting each other off, right? Yelling into somebody's car, they can't hear you because your window's up, and it don't even make sense that you're yelling, right? Like we are in these modes of relating to each other from a place of emptiness, of lack, of being at the bottom of the barrel. And from that place, it's hard to find the ability to want to watch that show that your partner loves and that you can't stand, or to want to take that time with your niece and nephew or your kid when they only see that you're home and you're there and it's time for play. So it is a significant tension, because being able to access rest in late capitalism is a privileged position. Not everybody has the ability to cultivate that. And I think it requires us to do the work of clearly redefining what it means for us to practice love together, so that we don't miss each other speaking from our exhaustion or acting from our exhaustion.
Yeah. In thinking about us learning how to practice so that we're able to love, other ways in which y'all are practicing rest so that you do have the energy to love.
I'm trying to be better. I'm sorry, Kyle, go ahead.
Oh, no, you go.
All right.
I'm
I'm
still
trying to be
processing.
better about my rituals. I'm trying to be better about getting away from the phone. Um, about making time for the things that I know are necessities. So if it comes to moving my body, I realize that I feel most human when I am active. That there are days where I really feel like wound up and tight, and simply getting outside and walking, getting my heart rate up, releases that. And there have been times in my life where I have sacrificed that practice for a litany of other things. And in order to be ready to do relationship well, I have to make sure I'm about my good practice. So it's really the basics for me. It's not anything particularly complex.
As you were talking, what came to mind for me is one of my most important rituals, which is my wind down at the end of the evenings. And one of the things that I've accepted is that as adults who have busy lives and working lives, often when we get home at the end of the day, there is an unspoken resentment about the fact that we do not have as much free time left as the end of the day as we would like, and not as much time as we personally require to really rest and recharge before we have to lie down to sleep and get up and do it all over again. But one of the things that I've been trying to dig deeper into is my ritual of winding down. So at a certain hour, being committed to, hey, the TV don't need to be on within an hour of you going to bed. Your devices need to be put away. Plug your phone up in another room. But also like the simple things like, hey, you know what? You got an hour before bedtime. Let's prepare for that. Go brush your teeth, wash your face, do your skincare, really absorbing and enjoying those moments because they're also an opportunity to express something about how I care for me, how I take care of this fleshly vessel that, as far as I know, it's the only one I get. And so cultivating just those small ways of being attentive to the need for rest and not just sleep, because I'll keep it 100. Over the last like year and some change, I was in a very, very challenging, perhaps the most challenging season of my professional life, just in terms of the moves I was trying to make, the amount of time I was working, the energy I was giving to so much. And so day after day until the weekend came, and even then, it's like you work super hard during the week and then you get to the weekend and feel like you can't even fully enjoy it. And by the time you're into it, it's like, oh, it's Sunday and Monday is right around the corner and I got to be up and ready to do what that requires. Um, and so I have deep empathy for the difficulty that can be embedded in, because a lot of stuff falls off once we're exhausted, once we're tired, once we're overtired, and it becomes a compounding thing. We don't feel better because we fell off on this stuff. We feel worse because we're not getting both the effects of these positive things, and there's the internalized guilt or the shame around not feeling like we're as on point or on top of things as we want to be, or as folk pretend to be in various media forms, right? Like everybody ain't got it as together just off screen. So, those are just the ways that I've tried to be thoughtful about the rest. Because to me, rest is not the same as just pausing. It is the importance of active recovery. How do we restore ourselves to good working order? Because if we're always running down to E, like that stresses our systems in a way that, you know, I just think so many people right now feel the weight of cumulative exhaustion, the kind of thing that like doesn't go away with a good night's sleep. And so, I'm trying to just be, first attentive to, oh, how does this show up in you? How does your body keep tabs or keep a score on all of these things unfolding, so that you can then be attentive to when you see it happening in others? Because sometimes too, we just need the encouragement, like, hey, help someone make space or make room to do the kind thing for themselves. And for me, at least this week, it was, man, manicure or pedicure. Let's sit in this massage chair for a while and like, let this technician like do what they do. So yeah, that's, to me, it's like, it's not a thing that we like achieve and then get it perfectly. Like, yes, I've optimized rest and recovery, but it's more so saying and acknowledging, okay, I can practice it in these small ways, and hopefully over time it builds into bigger ways.
I would agree in regards to it building over time. It connects to just the start of our conversation, and that ongoing processes and refinement and growth, right? So in love, if you view it as a practice and or journey, we're always on it. We don't arrive at that space and then that's it, right? So even in thinking about for myself, just like you said, the wind down or the morning and the evening hygiene practices, like I know that I'm loving myself well when I am intentional to have this morning practice, right? So whether or not that's like yoga in the morning or prayer, having a cup of tea before I go ahead and hit the email or the news feed, right? Just starting my day with me and ending my day with me slowly is a way in which I combat that compounded fatigue. Like you stated, I do agree in the fact that we came out of quarantine globally as a world, but we never paused. We never reassessed. We just returned back to what was quote unquote normal, which was abnormal already, right? So what does it mean for us to exit an explicit period of trauma and not rest and go back to what was abnormal? And I think about that now in the ways in which we are trying to show up for others, even though, like you said, we're exhausted, rightfully so, right? So in thinking about trying to balance and say, hey, like, hey, bro, hey, sis, I realized that you haven't been doing what you said that you would like to do, whether or not if I have a sister say, hey, I'm going to work out. Sis, did you work out today? Oh, no, I haven't. I got to do these things, right? So as you said, Edwin, that you put things on the back burner in regards to your health for a period of time. Like, what does it mean for us that when we realize that our sisters or our brothers are not practicing love and rest, like, what does it mean for us to like practice that empathy and that understanding?
That's extremely layered and difficult in some particular ways that regard like how we set up communication with each other. And I think, I always shy away from this idea that like it's often repeated and not really well thought about. You won't be loved, or you can't be loved until you love yourself. That kind of setup, right? And I think that that's incorrect completely. And I want to make that very clear. It is important for us to recognize that we get good at loving each other when we get serious about the practice of loving ourselves. And if we're going to learn and improve along the way, then we do need to figure out how to do that work within ourselves. And I say that because a lot of how I respond to people who I'm in community with is reflective of how I treat me. Like where do I have accountability for myself? Where do I practice grace with myself in a way that doesn't just let everything fly, but gives me space to say, okay, we were off this week. We did not hit the mark. And why? Why did this not go well? Do I actually take the time to think about, well, what was the reason that I didn't hit my deadlines or I was up late every single night throughout the week, which I very recently had this week where I just was not going to bed. And for me, that wasn't just me playing the game of, wanting to have more freedom. That was me, that made me question what is out of balance in my life? What is the thing that I'm responding to that I'm uneasy about, that I'm anxious about? And it's being able to know myself well enough to recognize that when a behavior manifests, that it is not just a happenstance thing. It's more often than not reflective of something that's happening externally or internally. And then I have to be curious enough to think about what's actually taking place so I can identify it and deal with it. In that way, if I see my friend or my brother, my sister falling or faltering, it's not coming to them with just a simple, hey, I see you messing this up, what's going on? But it's being curious about, well, what is the thing that I don't see that is creating this issue? And if I can have grace and love for that, then I can gently pull them toward the part that they need to hear. And, Kyle says often, like, this idea of brutal honesty is really about people wanting to inflict brutality. And it's not about honesty at all, because there are ways for us to be honest with each other in loving and care-filled space. There's a way for us to cultivate safety and say hard things to each other. And in order to learn to do that, I think we have to think about the type of space that we are able to receive difficult feedback.
The structure for this conversation, I think it does represent an opportunity to kind of dive into the perspectives and to sit in some of that discomfort. This idea of how there is a rhetorical value in like a statement like men are trash, because it's provocative, but it also, at its worst, and if repeated enough to the point where things start to lose their initial meaning, it models some of those same destructive behaviors that we know distance us from understanding each other in a way that doesn't allow for change to be made and for people to be heard. And so how do we move through being accountable for those things that men are responsible for, and are those destructive, I would say, things that men are responsible for, without then making being a Black man synonymous with there being something wrong with you. And I think it's a fine line, and it's not necessarily one that is, how do I want to say this? It's not employing that to operate within an excuse, because it starts with being accountable for those things that we are responsible for. But it's also recognizing and seeing across the spectrum of how, when we use these kind of dehumanizing tropes, how that model lacks love, and how when it loses that initial meaning, then we start to propagate the same destruction we're trying to avoid.
I come back to that point about brutality and how it takes real effort and real intention to treat one another with gentleness and with care. And it really requires a lot to do that for ourselves. Whether it's a matter of we don't think we're deserving or worthy of good treatment or gentleness. But also, I think at times a question of what happens when we believe somehow that that the gentleness, that the softness, that the grace somehow operates against our own achievement, our own accomplishment, our own success. There is a saying that comes to mind for me that I think about often. If you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so at times I think we're wrestling with competing interests. I want to get to where I'd like to be quickly. But also the question is, well, where are we ultimately trying to head? Like, so if the idea is that we want to flourish together, that we want to be in loving and graceful community, then to me, that looks like, okay, we got to lay the groundwork here and now. Like, we got to be willing to be present and be, to really be here. And it is clear to me in so many ways, and I feel like this is in sort of recent conversation for us, Edwin, the idea of all the things that really keep us from being truly present. We are embedded in a world that is full of endless distraction, and I really do believe in some respects that there are those who capitalize on and bank on us being distracted by comfort and distracted to our deaths. And so part of what I think, the resistance to that kind of outcome requires is that we're willing to just practice presence, practice a kind of centeredness and groundedness in which we can really acutely be aware of where we are and what is real, what is valuable, what is true. Because I think we've all in various ways been sold a bill of goods, a set of elaborate and attractive, but ultimately untrue things about what life is for, our purpose, our meaning. And to me, a lot of it just comes back to, are we able to remember who we are and why we're here, and to gently draw others into that, right? Like, not through shame, not through coercion, not through, oh, you need to get it together, you need to do this. So we all getting it together. But I will say, it's much more joyful to be doing the work of getting it together when I'm not alone.
Yeah. And thinking about doing things in community, which I agree with, and that tension between competition and collaboration, which is in a lot of our field, right? A lot of our industries, like you want the CV or you want the awards, you want the long accolades, right? But that means that you're always in competition with someone else. And sometimes that someone else is someone that you hold dear. So in thinking about where we are trying to go and how we are trying to live, that's my question for us all. Like, are we being intentional to create the life that we want to live in this season? And coupled with that, how can we support each other in creating that space and living in that space as Black women and as Black men, right? So if we're on this journey of love, of freedom, of peace, like what does that look like for us in the really like tangible ways that we can practice it?
Yeah. I, over the last few years, had to identify that I was living by default, that I had put in a significant amount of work to get to particular milestones, and that my hope had been that getting to that point would be enough. And what I realized is that allowing myself to be taken by the current in whichever direction it was flowing, I was completely unsatisfied. And moreover, I was disappointed and upset. It was a source of anger for me. And so I had to get honest with myself about where I was missing the mark in that way. I think we do ourselves a favor when we are consistently checking in and not trying to filter what our outcomes will be simply through this ability to accrue. I think capitalism has trained us well. It's made us not be able to see our value beyond what we can produce and what we can consume and what we can display that we have conquered or acquired. And that spirit of competition, I think, is native to that kind of capitalistic training. I don't see myself as being in competition with anyone. And I think that's important because the idea for me is that we all have purpose. We all have work and tasks that are specific to our spirit, to our presence, to our experience, to our talent, to our expression. And so to compete with somebody for space is to see their presence as maybe duplicative and capable of replacing what I can do and what I can bring. And that doesn't compute for me. So I don't find myself thinking about being in competition with others. And so from that standpoint, I think it's important for us to get clear about what it is like we're bringing. I don't want to say bring it to the table because I feel like that's particularly loaded in a Black culture context. But what is it that what is your energy? What is your spirit? What is your dopeness? What is it that you love? What are you passionate about? And I think when we are caught up in the chase and in the rat race, those things don't matter so much because it's about what I can get the most money doing. And I get it. And I'm not over here acting like I want to be broke because I'm in the same economy, in the same wild country that y'all are. So I know what the rules of engagement are here and I know how much eggs cost. And in that context, I think we have to be able to, as a people broadly, to really ask ourselves, like, is this the best it can be? Mm-hmm. Is this all we can imagine? Fighting each other over this little bit that can get handed out. And yeah, I don't want to operate in a way where I can only imagine fighting for the top spot. Because if there's only one top spot, what kind of world is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think similarly, I'm resistant to this idea that life has to be a zero-sum game. That me flourishing only matters if someone else loses, someone else suffers or fails. And what's become clearer for me over time is how this ethos of pursuit, chasing the bag, right, of trying to get to, the money or whatever, people don't seem attentive to how none of us lives outside of context. Everything we're doing is intertwined and connected to the doings and the beings of other people. So if hey, I'm so busy chasing the bag, I don't have time to pick up groceries, man. Let me have somebody deliver it. Okay, well, that requires somebody whose job is to do the gathering, the sorting, the delivering. That means if they're doing that job, they can't be on the same paper chase you're on, right? You too busy to go grocery shopping. So, okay, now someone else's job is that thing. And we could tend to think of that as menial or lower level labor, right? You know, think about everything you're doing in the course of a day. It's very easy to forget that like these things are facilitated by so much unseen labor. And so what we think is just, oh, I'm getting it, I'm getting after it on my own. It's like, man, we don't realize how much we are always benefiting from the labor of those that we just ignore or like don't know exist. So, who is somewhere, mining the materials that make possible the components of the computer I'm using to be on this Zoom call right now. Right?
Talk about it.
It's like and it can sound like, oh, well, that's ridiculous. Like everybody's benefiting from something. Yeah. But like, are we conscious of how our ability to exist in the world in a way that we think of as free and the way that we think of as self-oriented? It's like, man, it takes a whole lot of labor and a whole lot of illusion to believe that you're doing this on your own. Right? Like you ain't I never hunted for my food. I never, dug a well for my water. I never, you know, refined fossil fuels to like put them in my car. I never built a car, but but I'm glad I got one to drive that's paid for. Like, so you just on the very basic level, like nothing you do in this world is just you. And even like the idea of a self, you can't differentiate a self as when you come into this world as a baby. Like you understand yourself as just part of everything. Like you think everything is you. And then you start to understand like, oh, a self only makes sense in relationship with or in contrast to a community. And so for me, I'm just like, yo, even at the level of my like most basic thoughts, trying to come back to this question of like, who is your community? And I'll name that like building a community or like saying you ought to have one is a lot different from actually getting started. Especially like, if you uproot and are in different places, like as a person in academia, like I've moved to a lot of different places pursuing my career. And yeah, community is important. And also it doesn't just happen. Like, and you got to think about how do you manage and sustain in the between time between the arrival and the recognition, like, yo, I need people. And then actually arriving at a place where you feel like, oh, I have people. I feel safe. I feel secure. I can relax a bit. I don't have to feel like I'm chasing to make myself secure. Like, and that's more than a notion. Like, so we can frame it well, but we also got to acknowledge like, yo, this is hard. because the world is not set up for that, and often will treat you like you're crazy, like you're off kilter for acknowledging that you have need, that you have vulnerability.
Yeah, and I think in thinking about acknowledging the need to be in community, I think that's where I want to arrive or live in, right? To boldly say, I need you, brother, I need you, sister, because if I don't have you, I don't have me, right? Like you said, you only acknowledge yourself in relation or in contrast to others. So in this practice of love in all relationship types, it's living in that understanding that I can't survive on my own, I can't be free on my own, and also I don't want to.
Yes.
And those are the people that I want around me who have that honesty to hold life and love sacred. So we're going to do it together. And I think that's what's make living folks who choose to live in solitude or who are in solitude in comparison to folks who have community, they don't live as long. Like that's what we know. So if we want to live well, we have to live together. So right now, that's the space that I'm in. Like, what does it mean to live well and in community with the spaces that I occupy? And also, like you said, you build community, but what does it mean for us to maintain and sustain community? Especially as we're getting older. Like there's a lot of conversation like, oh, what does it mean? Like, how do you gain friends as you get older? Like, oh, having new friends in adulthood is really tough, right? But why is that so? And that's a question I'm sitting with right now. Like, what does it mean for us to enter into relationships as we age? So that's where I'm at right now. I'm thinking about like, how do we create a life that's intentional? It also means to reject their understanding of success, right? That competition or those accolades. Like I'm not going to sacrifice my CV. I'm not going to sacrifice my community for my CV because when I'm sick or when I'm down or when I'm depressed, they by my side. The CV and those accolades, right? And those descriptions and titles, that can't save me. They hold us as disposable, replaceable. That's what capitalism is. So it's like coming to terms with that and coming to terms of, okay, if that's the way in which I choose to live, then what am I okay with losing if that's the way that I'm choosing to live? Yeah.
Yeah. You're talking about the just the idea of our CVs being the thing that keeps us warm brought me back to that sketch on College Dropout. What's gonna keep me warm? My degrees. Nah, actually, no. We very much need each other. I am because you are. Yeah, and then I'm consistently reminded of that. One of the things that I find myself doing is questioning why. And so when we repeat the thing over and over, like it's so hard to make friends as adults. Well, why? And I think it's what we've accepted as practice. Our third spaces are gone. The other places that we go besides home and work have been eliminated largely. The organization of our communities and not being particularly walkable, not having parks around, things like that, those things make it hard for us to find people and engage with people. But it's also because, Kyle and I recently spoke about this, it's because we've normalized this idea of being connected to each other because we can see what we post on social media. And I think it is not particularly profound, but it's important for us to be reminded that that's not a real place and that's not real connection. And so if we are going to particularly in the current social context, social and political context, be really intentional about cultivating and maintaining community, I think it starts with, for lack of a better immediate term, with touching grass. Like, we got to get out of these isolated spaces. And as you said, Sherella, like, we need to be in a space where we are with each other. And that takes work and undoing. You mentioned earlier about us kind of going from, lockdown at the beginning of the pandemic and just kind of jumping back into things. We have not collectively taken time to grieve what we lost. And as unpopular as it is to go back and actually count the numbers that are still rising, there's a lot of people who were here and are no longer because of this pandemic that is yet ongoing. And we have not collectively taken a moment to stop and recognize that. And I wonder what that does to us, how that erodes our humanity, how that stops us from seeing the value of our lives together. And we need, and we can still do that grief work. It is still available to us. I think the question is whether we're willing to stop long enough to actually do it. Are we too afraid to actually go to that space together?
Okay, Edwin and Kyle, I want to offer y'all space to say your social medias. I see that, Kyle, you're working on a book. So if y'all want to share any public spaces where folks can reach out to y'all, please do so.
For sure. So you can catch me on Instagram at Keelay all day. That's at KEELAY all day. And yeah, I am working on a book right now. It's called Chasing Ghosts, The Politics of Black Religious Leadership, and basically exploring the mythologies around the idea that singular charismatic figures are the driving force of social political change. And why do we get invested in the idea of a kind of messianic frame or archetype for what leadership looks like, particularly in Black communities?
Yes, sir. And you can find me on Instagram as well at Dr. Gomab. That's DR_GEAUXMAB. You can also follow the podcast on Instagram at Black Men Unlearning. And if you want to get in contact with the pod, blackmenunlearning@gmail.com.
Thank y'all for sharing. You can follow me on all platforms as TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at Lirae Journey. So thank you again, Edwin and Kyle, as a part of Black Men Unlearning, for sharing your journey and reflections on love during the season of your life. Thank you, sisters, supporters, sponsors, and brothers for listening. As always, love is real and eternal. In community, peace. Hey sis, subscribe, comment, and leave a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. To encourage other sisters on their journey, share the show with them and tag at Lirae Journey on Facebook and Instagram. I'll see you in the chats. Listen to the Lirae Journey podcast on all platforms and follow us on social media at Lirae Journey. You can also find us online at podcast.mckissickhealth.com. That's podcast.mckissickhealth.com. So come on in.